They say time heals all wounds, but what if your greatest wound wasn't death, but silence? For years, Clara Whitby lived a quiet life, believing the soldier she loved, Captain Thomas Ashcroft, died having forgotten her. But when she discovers a box of unsent letters, fierce, heartbreaking confessions of love, fear, and enduring devotion, she learns the devastating truth. He loved her all along. Now, a ghost of the past has returned, scarred and secretive. Can the words he never sent bridge the years of silence and the secrets of survival? This is The Letters He Never Sent, an emotionally rich tale of war, memory, and a second chance at a love that time itself could not extinguish. Settle in, prepare your heart, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single whispered confession. Chapter 1: The Box in the Attic. The air in the Ashcroft estate attic was thick and quiet, tasting of dust, lavender, and the long settled silence of things forgotten. For 6 years, this house had stood as a mausoleum to memory, a heavy stone on the gentle breast of the countryside. Now it was being prepared for sale, and Clara Whitby, in her sensible wool gown and with her practical, tidy hands, was tasked with giving the past its final rites. It was not a duty she had sought, yet it was one she could not refuse. The late Mrs. Ashcroft, a woman of brittle charity, had bequeathed the clearing out to her father's former housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, and Clara, ever the dutiful daughter even after her father's passing, was here to offer assistance. She had known the estate all her life, a place of bright summer days and childish secrets shared with Thomas Ashcroft, the squire's son, but it felt colder now, stripped bare of the spirit of its former inhabitants. A mercy that it will finally pass out of Lord Ashcroft's hands, Mrs. Davies murmured, dusting a portrait of a stern-faced ancestor. Such a cold man, my dear. No wonder the poor lad went off to war to escape him. Clara merely nodded, her heart a familiar, dull ache. Lord Ashcroft had disowned Thomas for an indiscretion before the war, a foolish, boyish scrape over a matter of honor that had infuriated his domineering father. He had never forgiven Thomas for leaving, and years later, when the news came that Captain Ashcroft was presumed dead behind enemy lines, the father had shown little more than a stony resolve to move on. Clara moved towards a forgotten corner where the roof sloped low, a niche of shadows and splintered light. There, tucked behind a broken spinning wheel, sat a weathered wooden box. It was small, roughly the size of a lady's sewing casket, and tied tightly with a faded blue silk ribbon. It was a color Thomas had always teased suited her eyes. A strange, electric jolt ran through her fingers as they brushed the wood. This was not the property of Lord or Lady Ashcroft. It was something private, something belonging to the boy she remembered. She carried the box to a square of sunlight, the ribbon crumbling to dust as she untied it. Beneath the lid, packed with a terrible ordered neatness, lay dozens upon dozens of letters. They were small and thin, folded tight, the parchment rough and wartime scarce. Every one was addressed to Miss Clara Whitby. The world outside the attic window, the bright, ordinary country world, receded. Clara's breath caught, a thin, painful sound in the silent room. She recognized the strong, familiar script instantly. Thomas's hand. She had waited. Oh, how she had waited. Through the long, brutal years of the conflict, she had checked the post daily, convinced that one small word from him would be her anchor in the national storm of fear. When the last terrible telegram arrived, informing the village of his presumed death, the greatest sorrow was not just the loss of Thomas, but the crushing, bitter belief that she had been utterly forgotten. He had, she concluded in the cruel logic of grief, chosen to write to no one at all, or worse, to someone else. She had buried her hope then, settling the ashes of her youth beneath the quiet, practical routine of her life. Now, her fingers trembling, she lifted the top letter. It bore no seal, no stamp, no date of posting, only a date of writing. June 14th, 1908, Northern France. The man she thought had forgotten her had, in truth, spoken to her all along, only the words had never traveled further than this box. She unfolded the first, her eyes blurring over the elegant, forceful lines. My dearest Clara, we march tomorrow, and I do not know when the leisure to write will come again. There is a deafening quiet here before the storm, and in this pause, the mind, which one attempts to keep steady with maps and orders, wanders most wickedly. It wanders to the last time I saw you. You were wearing that simple blue muslin, and the sun caught the gold flecks in your hair as you spoke of planting new roses in the lower garden. It is an image that is criminally simple, yet it is all I possess of home, and I guard it like the only water in the desert. I wish to tell you many things I was too much of a coward to say before I left. That the reason I stayed in the village as long as I dared was simply to catch a glimpse of you crossing the green. That the only ambition I hold for survival is the hope of sitting with you once more by the river and not speaking of war, but of a future I dare not sketch even for myself, for fear of tempting the fates. I love you, Clara. There. I have said it. I pray this confession remains forever between me and this page. I would not burden your excellent life with the shadow of a soldier who may not return. Please do not wait. But know that you are the only reason I am Thomas, and not merely a uniform. A small, choked sound escaped Clara's lips. It was a confession more direct, more honest than any she had dreamed of hearing from the sometimes reticent, always kind boy she had known. He had loved her with the fierce private intensity of a man facing his end. She sat on the floor, the dust motes dancing like lost stars around her head, and began to read the others. Each one was a step in a shared life they never lived. Accounts of battle fatigue and moments of terrifying beauty, philosophical musings on courage, and always, running through it all like a deep, warm current, a fierce, unspoken devotion to her. If I close my eyes, I can almost smell the earth of your father's fields. The men speak of women they've left behind, and I keep silent, for my thoughts of you are too sacred for the barrack room. I fear I will return a ghost of the man who left, and you will not know me. But the man who loves you, that one will remain unchanged. Grief and wonder collided within her chest, a hurricane of emotion she had thought herself incapable of feeling again. The man she had mourned as cold or indifferent was, in truth, a poet of the heart, who had shielded her from the truth of his passion out of what he clearly believed was honor. She finished the final letter, one written years later, just before the fateful patrol that had led to his disappearance, and looked out over the sunlit grounds of Ashcroft. The years of quiet routine, of carefully constructed resilience, shattered around her. Her eyes, usually so clear and steady, were swimming with tears. The love she thought she had lost was not lost, merely unspoken. It had been sealed away in this box, waiting patiently for her to find it. But what was she to do with this treasure of a dead man's heart? It was a bridge to the past, yes, but also a wound, reminding her of the life that silence had stolen from them both. Clara, are you quite well, dear? Mrs. Davies called from the landing. Clara hastily gathered the letters, tucking them back into the box, her fingers clutching the weathered wood. Perfectly well, Mrs. Davies, she called back, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. Only clearing away a few old trinkets, nothing of consequence. But she knew that was a lie. She had not cleared away the past. She had instead resurrected the dearest, most painful part of it. The discovery of these letters had not closed the chapter on Captain Thomas Ashcroft. It had torn open the book. Chapter 2, The Ghost Who Returns. The revelation of Thomas's letters had cleaved Clara's life into two distinct epochs, before the box and after. The quiet grace with which she had borne her father's passing and the solemnity of her duties now felt like a veil she had worn, hiding a deeper, unacknowledged sorrow. The letters, reread countless times in the hushed solitude of her room, were both a solace and an agony. They were proof of a profound, enduring love, yet they underscored the bitter truth of a future irrevocably lost. How many times had she imagined his return, only to temper the fantasy with the stark reality of his absence? The village, a tapestry woven with habit and shared histories, began to hum with a most peculiar thread of gossip. Whispers, like tendrils of mist, curled around the market stalls and through the church pews. A stranger had taken residence at the old Ashcroft Lodge, a small, secluded dwelling on the estate's periphery that had long been left to decay. They say he's a recluse, Mrs. Henderson confided to Clara over bolts of fabric at the haberdasher's. Never shows his face after dusk. And such a gaunt figure, my dear. Not a local, surely. Clara dismissed it with a polite smile, her thoughts still captive to the ghost of Thomas, the boy who had sketched dreams of roses and shared futures in unsent ink. The idea of any other stranger stirring such a fuss seemed trivial in comparison. She had, after all, made her peace with the dead. But fate, in its often cruel design, rarely respects such careful resolutions. It was a misty morning, heavy with the scent of damp earth and late summer wildflowers, when Clara walked the familiar path to the church. Her mind was occupied with the upcoming harvest festival, planning provisions for the village feast, a task that demanded her usual meticulous attention. As she rounded the bend by the old sycamore, where the lane narrowed and dipped towards the lodge gates, a figure emerged from the morning haze. He stood by the rusted iron gates of the lodge, tall and lean, silhouetted against the diffused light. His shoulders were broad, but there was an unnatural tension to them, as if he carried an invisible weight. He wore no hat, and his dark hair, longer than was fashionable, was touched with gray at the temples, though he could not be more than 30. His face was turned away from her, gazing at the lodge with an air of profound weariness. And then he turned. The breath caught in Clara's throat, a shard of ice splintering in her chest. The world tilted, the familiar path beneath her feet seeming to sway. It was Thomas. Thomas, alive. Yet, it was not the Thomas she remembered. The boyish curve of his jaw was now sharp, defined by a series of faint scars, one tracing a jagged line across his left temple, another disappearing beneath his ear. His once bright, inquisitive eyes now held the deep, unsettling distance of someone who had seen too much, a haunted landscape within their depths. The youthful light, the easy confidence she recalled, was gone, replaced by a profound, weary stillness. He was gaunt, almost spectral, a man carved from shadow and sorrow. Shock, sharp and visceral, punched the air from her lungs. Joy, illogical and overwhelming, threatened to bring her to her knees. Then, swiftly, mercilessly, anger bloomed. A hot, fierce bloom she had not known she possessed, and beneath it all a searing, disbelieving ache. She stood frozen, her basket of church flowers clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. He saw her then, a flicker of recognition, of pain, of something she could not decipher, crossed his scarred face before settling into a carefully blank mask. He made no move towards her, simply stood, watching her with those ancient, wounded eyes. "Thomas?" she whispered, the name a fragile thing, caught on the morning mist. He gave a barely perceptible nod, his gaze never leaving her face. The silence stretched, unbearable and electric, punctuated only by the distant caw of a crow. You're alive," she managed, the words tasting like ash and miracle on her tongue. "As you see," he replied, his voice a low, gravelly timbre, unfamiliar and rough, utterly devoid of the warmth she remembered. It was the voice of a man who had not spoken in a very long time, or one who had learned the hard lessons of silence. The anger, cold and righteous, now surged, eclipsing all other feeling. The letters, still clutched like a hidden burden in her memory, screamed for justice. He had loved her. He had suffered. And he had returned, silent while she had buried him, mourned him, and cursed the perceived indifference that was never true. Her practical nature, usually her anchor, now demanded answers. "Why, Thomas?" she heard herself demand, her voice surprisingly steady, though her hands trembled. "Why did you never send them?" His gaze hardened, a veil descending over his eyes. "Send what, Clara? These!" she cried, abandoning all propriety. She reached into her reticule, pulling out a handful of the crumpled precious letters she carried everywhere now, a testament to her private sorrow and his secret devotion. She thrust them towards him, the pages fluttering in the damp air like wounded birds. "These confessions of love, of fear, of a future you dreamed of with me. Why did you let me believe you had forgotten me? Why did you let the world believe you were dead?" He stared at the letters in her outstretched hand, his face unreadable. His eyes, though shadowed, held a flash of something akin to terror. He made no move to take them. "Some words," he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, "are meant to stay buried." It was a cruel, dismissive answer, utterly unlike the sensitive, expressive boy who had written those passionate words. It stung her more than any outright rejection. "Buried?" she echoed, her voice rising. "For years, Thomas, I lived believing you had abandoned the memory of me, that I was nothing to you. While you wrote these, knowing I would never see them? What manner of man does that?" His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his scarred skin. He took a hesitant step closer, and in a gesture that startled her with its unexpected tenderness, his hand reached out, his fingers brushing against hers, still clutching the letters. The contact was brief, searing. Her skin tingled where he had touched her, a phantom warmth spreading. His hands, she noticed now, trembled. not with anger, but with a deep, barely suppressed tremor. The controlled mask on his face faltered for a moment, and she saw a flicker of something raw and desolate in his eyes, a profound agony that resonated with the words in the letters she held. He pulled his hand back as if burned. The silence between them, thick and heavy, now burned with the heat of unspoken pain, unanswered questions, and a profound sense of loss that transcended even the years of his absence. The ghost of the boy she loved stood before her, a man she barely recognized, bearing wounds far deeper than any scar on his skin. "I must go," he said, his voice a strained whisper, and without another word he turned, a dark, retreating figure disappearing back into the mist surrounding the lodge, leaving Clara alone on the path, clutching the letters, her heart a raw, bleeding wound. She had found him, yes, but the Thomas who returned was a stranger, wrapped in secrets, and the letters that had brought her solace now felt like a cruel mockery in the face of his cold, evasive silence.
How could you, Thomas God?
Clara, please.
Chapter 3, Echoes of the Battlefield. The shock of Thomas's return settled over the village like a perpetual heavy fog. Society, driven by its dual motors of pity and scandal, treated him as a ghost returned from the dead. They whispered that he had been miraculously spared, but their eyes held a chilling doubt, for he was clearly not merely spared, he was profoundly changed. Thomas, for his part, made little effort to dispel the mystery. He moved through the small world of the country lanes with the guarded bearing of a man expecting a fresh ambush, attempting to rebuild his life in the solitude of the decaying lodge. Clara, armed with the passionate proof of his love from the letters, could not maintain her distance. The encounter by the gate had been agonizing, yet it had confirmed one thing. Thomas, though hardened and distant, was still Thomas. The unsent words were a constant, ringing counterpoint to his cruel silence. She felt an urgent, almost desperate need to draw him back into the light, to understand the man who stood before her and reconcile him with the poet in the box. Her sister, Lydia Whitby, possessed a romantic nature, utterly untouched by the grief that had quieted Clara's youth. Lydia, lively and 18, saw only the dramatic return of a handsome wounded soldier, a hero from a novel. "You must invite him to dinner, Clara," Lydia insisted one evening, fluttering her hands. "It is the only civilized thing to do. He is quite the most fascinating enigma, the way he looks at nothing, as though he sees straight through the curtains to the trenches." Clara, though internally resisting the scrutiny Thomas would face, realized Lydia had a point. Protocol, and perhaps her own yearning, demanded she make the gesture. She sent a stiff, formal invitation, and to her surprise, Thomas accepted with an equally brief, formal note. The dinner at the Whitby cottage was a study in strained domesticity. The room felt too warm, the cutlery too bright, the conversation too brittle. Thomas sat like an uncomfortable sentinel, his silence broken only by the necessary polite murmurings. He barely touched the food. It was Lydia, with her innocent, fearless charm, who began to chip away at his reserve. She asked him not of the war, but of the continent, of the rivers and the cities, and whether the stars looked different there. "You must have found great beauty, even amidst the conflict, Captain Ashcroft," Lydia said, her large, earnest eyes fixed on him. For the first time that evening, Thomas's posture softened. A shadow of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting echo of the boy Clara knew. "Beauty is the last thing you expect," he replied, his voice still low. "But yes, in the utter desolation, sometimes you find a single poppy blooming in the mud, a resilience you didn't think existed." As Lydia pressed him gently for anecdotes, drawing him out of himself, Clara watched the interaction from across the table. A sharp, unfamiliar sensation pierced her heart, a sudden, unwelcome jealousy. It wasn't that she feared Lydia's intentions. Her sister was too young, too artless. But watching Thomas respond to Lydia's light, open charm, giving her a gentle attention he refused his former love, was an ache. Lydia was a mirror of who Clara once was, unburdened, full of possibility, and Thomas perhaps preferred that reflection to the difficult, heartbroken woman he had returned to. Later, as Clara walked him to the door, she seized a moment of desperate honesty. "Lydia is charming," she said, her voice strained. "But it is me you wrote to. It is I who read your confessions." His face went instantly cold, the brief warmth extinguished. Those letters are history, Clara, and history is rarely repeated with grace. But what happened to you? She pleaded. Why this coldness? Tell me, Thomas. Tell me what they did to you. He hesitated, his shoulders slumping slightly. He looked past her into the darkness of the night as if viewing a landscape of unbearable suffering. I can tell you fragments, he said, his voice raw. Captivity, yes, and the terror of knowing your life hangs on the whim of a century. I saw things, Clara, betrayal, not by the enemy alone, and the comrades, the good men who did not make it home. We make impossible bargains to survive, and those bargains leave marks deeper than any scar you see. He stopped short, the words lodging in his throat. The raw honesty was fleeting, replaced swiftly by a profound self-loathing. I am a man constructed of lies now, Clara. The man you loved died with the others. Leave the ghost alone. That same night, sleepless and haunted by his words, Clara went back to the wooden box. She searched through the stack until she found the final, single, unsealed letter. It was the one he had written the night before he was captured. The night the ghost of Thomas began to take form. She unfolded the brittle page. My dearest, my impossible Clara, I write this knowing it must be the last. Tomorrow we go into the dark, and I have a grim certainty that I will not return, or if I do, I will not be the man worthy of you. There is a weight coming, a pressure that will force the worst out of men. If I am killed, mourn me for a season, then live your excellent, bright life. If I disappear, if I am lost to the maps and the reports, you must believe this. I beg you, forget me. Do not waste one more moment of your precious years waiting for a man who failed to be a hero, failed to be a man of honor. I confess my love in these pages because I cannot live with the lie that I did not feel it, but I ask you to erase me completely. Find a good man, Clara, a gentle man, one who has not been soiled by this earth. Thomas. Clara wept over the page, the ink blurring beneath her tears. The letter was not a cold dismissal, but a desperate final act of self-sacrifice. He hadn't wanted her to wait because he had anticipated the darkness, the shame and guilt that he now carried. His silence, his distance, was a fulfillment of this final, heartbreaking plea. She understood the why of his silence now, but the understanding did not ease the pain of the years stolen by his desperate, misguided attempt to protect her. He believed himself unworthy. He believed his love was a taint. The full tragedy of their lost years, a tragedy born of a noble yet ultimately devastating silence, settled over her like a shroud.
How could you do this worthless thing?
I had no choice.
The truth, when it came, was not a simple rejection, but a desperate plea. Forget me. Clara finally knows why Thomas remained silent. He believed his love a taint, his survival an act of profound dishonor. But understanding the reason does not ease the pain of the years stolen. Thomas still stands behind a wall of shame, unwilling to accept the forgiveness she holds out. And now the whispers are growing darker. You have just finished part 1 of the letters he never sent. Prepare yourself, for the secrets of the battlefield are about to walk right through the cottage door. Will the darkness Thomas carries shatter Clara's fragile hope forever? Find out in part 2, where the greatest betrayal is yet to be revealed.